Welcome to my another tutorial, and this time I'll make this procedural world texture in Blender, and this is the final result. So to get started, let me open up a new scene, and I will quickly turn on the add-on to show you what buttons I'm pressing. So I will create a new plane and assign a material to it. Now I'm ready to go to the shading workspace. The first thing I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna create a brick texture and connect it to the base color of the shader. Now I can reduce the frequency of the brick texture and change the color 1 and 2. I'm gonna make them white. So this is gonna be the white lane marks on the road, but this is too thick at the moment, so I will decrease the mortar size. So let's do that, something like that. And for now I would like to reduce the smoothness all the way down to 0 because it tends to reduce the quality of the texture, so I would like to reduce it for now, but we can add it a little later after we place it properly. So if you got the right scale, you can add another brick texture and connect it to the base color again and do the same thing, but this time I will make the colors black for the bricks and make the mortar line yellow and reduce the mortar smoothness as well. I can increase brick width to get this type of stripe pattern. So now we have to make the line as thin as possible because we're going to stretch the texture later. So let's reduce the mortar size. You might want to type it in manually. Okay, that is thin enough. So now I would like to mix these two textures. To do that, we can add another node called mix RGB and connect the color to color 1 and 2. After you brought those in, you're gonna see this, and definitely we need to relocate all of the textures we got. So to do that, I will search for mapping node and the texture coordinate node. So we can pick UV and connect it to vector, and pick vector and connect it to vector of the brick texture. We can bring it to the both brick textures. Now what I can do is I can adjust the scale of the UV, so we can stretch the texture or relocate the texture or even rotate the texture. So let's adjust the scale to fit this texture to the plane. So something like that. Oops. So basically we're reducing the number. So something like 0.1 makes it fit perfectly, and you might want to stretch it out on the x-axis as well. So I'll go with 0.3. Okay. Now I want the center line to be a bit thicker, so now we can go back to the brick texture and adjust the mortar size. But if you make this too thick, you will see the other lines interrupt this texture, the entire texture. So uh, I will deal with this later. But for now, let me just get the right value for this. 0.008. Bits, bit narrower. Okay, something like that. And now I'm gonna go to the UV editing workspace, and we can go to the material preview and select the UV shell, and we can scale it down on the y-axis a little bit to hide those lines. So that fixes the problem. So back to the shading panel, and I would like to add more detail. I'd like to add more details to the texture because there's no road in the world this clean. So what I like to do is I wanna create another procedural texture such as noise texture to add some variation to the color. So if you connect it to this, you will see some color noises, but I want to make this thing black and white. So to do that, I can search for another node, which is color ramp. So if you connect this, it will turn this into a black and white image, and you could sort of adjust the contrast of the image. So that's really cool. And now you could deal with the scale of the texture and the detail. So you can get the right scale for this, but it is quite hard to imagine what it would look like when it's finally mixed. So let's mix this texture by adding in another mix RGB node and bring in those two nodes. So we can connect this to the base color again. And now this is what you can see. It looks blown out a little bit, so we should make the texture a bit darker. Or you could also adjust the factor like that. Or you could just reduce the brightness of the color manually. So when you're done with the noise texture, you could also bring this in to the roughness. If you do that, you're gonna see this glossy surface. So you might want to increase the roughness a little bit. And it's driven by this texture, so to do that, we can add in another math node and put it in between, and we can change it to something like multiply, which works the best, and adjust the value to get a proper result. Or maybe add works better. So you can just get your favorite result. You might want to go with the original noise texture without the color ramp filter. That will make some difference actually. So let me just try that. it really depends on your style. If you want rough surface, you can just reduce this value, increase this value, or if you want a wet surface, you might want to go with this, and you can apply this method to create some puddles. So I will go with something in between, and finally I will create another procedural texture. It can work with noise texture, but I will try out with masquerade texture. I will use this for normal, which is dot map, to connect it to the normal of the shader. So if we create another bump node and connect it to normal, actually I have to connect this to the height. So if I do that, at first this is what you're gonna see. So let's reduce the strength a little bit and increase the scale. At the moment it sort of looks like water, so we should increase the detail and dimension. Actually we should decrease dimension. So now you get this kind of rough surface, which looks like an actual road texture. You can adjust the strength to get the best look. The higher you go, you're gonna get more rough surface. Even if you set the roughness to 0, it will make it look rough since it scatters the light. So I will go with something like that. You can keep making adjustments to get a better look or get a whatever look you want to achieve. So finally, let's deal with the mortar smoothness to blend these lines a little bit more naturally. So let's type in a very small number like 0.005, like that. Since the texture is stretched out, it doesn't work in all direction, but it's still nice to have this type of effect. So let's do the same thing to the other brick texture, 0.005, maybe a little more for this one. Okay, 0.1 or 0.2, something in between that range works well. And yeah, basically we're almost done. You can always play with the color or add some variation or whatnot. So this is a pretty easy way to make a road texture without having to find a photograph.